The telephone rang at 11:42 p.m. in a quiet home in Marin County, where the night air carried the scent of bay water and eucalyptus through windows that had been left open to catch the October breeze. The sound cut through the silence like a blade through paper. Robert Redford had been reading by lamplight as he did every night now, slowly, carefully, like a man who had learned that time doesn't return what it takes, and that every page turned might be one closer to the last. At 78, he kept fewer phones than he once had. Most callers reached his assistants, his foundation, or the lawyers who managed what remained of his public life. But this old landline existed for one reason: the possibility that someone, somewhere, would call with a voice too small to get past the modern world of gatekeepers and intermediaries. He set down his book, a worn copy of Thoreau, and lifted the receiver with hands that showed their age in liver spots and careful movements. "Hello." The voice on the other end was young, thin, controlled in the way children sound when they're trying not to cry in front of adults they don't know. "Mr. Redford?" "Yes." "This is Elena Vasquez. You don't really know me, but you knew my great-grandfather." Names have weight. Some unlock doors you didn't know you'd left open. Some carry the force of decades in a single word. Redford straightened in his chair, setting the book aside completely. "What was his name?" "Miguel Vasquez. He met you in 1984, in East Los Angeles, Boyle Heights. There was a meeting about tearing down houses." The memory surfaced slowly, like something rising from deep water, folding metal chairs arranged in uneven rows, coffee in paper cups gone cold, families listening as strangers in suits explained why their homes had to disappear for the greater good. "I remember," Redford said quietly. "They're doing it again," Elena whispered, and now he could hear the tears she'd been holding back. "Same street, different company, same plan. They call it revitalization now instead of urban renewal, but it's the same thing." "When?" "Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. The bulldozers are already parked at the end of our block." Redford looked at the clock on his desk. 11:45 p.m. In just over 6 hours, another neighborhood would begin to disappear. He was a man who had earned the right to rest, whose doctor warned him about stress, whose body reminded him daily that he was no longer young. A man who had learned how easily promises fade when life gets loud and complicated. "Elena, where are your parents right now?" "My mum works the night shift at the hospital. She can't miss work or we'll lose our insurance. My dad died when I was little. My grandma is here, but she's sick, really sick. I didn't want to wake her up because her heart can't take much more stress." "How old are you?" 12. I'll be 13 next month." 12 years old, making phone calls at midnight to strangers, trying to save her family's home. Redford felt something tighten in his chest, not his heart, but something deeper, the place where old promises live. "How did you get this number?" "My great-grandfather saved things, newspaper clippings, letters. He had a shoebox full of stuff about you. There was a letter you wrote him after the first meeting. He said, if this day ever came, if they tried to take our house again, I should call you. He said you were different from other famous people. He said you kept your word." Redford remembered that letter now. He had written it because he hadn't done enough back then, because he had walked away from Miguel Vasquez's fight, feeling like he should have stayed, should have done more, should have used whatever influence he had to make a difference that mattered. "Elena, tell me exactly what's happening." She explained about the notices that had appeared on doors 3 days ago. Condemned properties, eminent domain, lawyers the families couldn't afford to fight a city that had already signed all the papers and approved all the plans. "The bulldozers come at 6 in the morning," she said again, her voice getting smaller. "They're going to knock down everything. Our house, Mrs. Rodriguez's house next door, the Martinez family across the street. All of it." Redford walked to his window and looked out at the quiet, expensive darkness of Marin County, a place where no one planned to erase entire neighborhoods at dawn, where property values rose instead of falling victim to municipal convenience. The memory was clearer now. 1984. He had been filming a small part in a movie he no longer remembered and had found himself with an afternoon free in Los Angeles, restless, still believing that presence mattered more than absence. He had wandered into a community center in Boyle Heights, drawn by the sound of voices raised not in anger, but in desperation. He remembered Miguel Vasquez standing up near the end of the meeting, a man in his 60s, thin from years of hard work, with calloused hands and careful English. A man who spoke like someone who had learned that words mattered because they were often the only weapons available to people like him. "My family has lived in our house for 22 years, Miguel had said to the room, full of city officials and developers. "My wife died in that house. My children grew up there. My great-granddaughter is learning to walk in those rooms. You want to knock it down so you can build stores?" The city planner had smiled the kind of professional smile that meant nothing. "Mr. Vasquez, I understand this is difficult, but progress requires change. The city is offering fair market compensation for all affected properties." "Fair?" Miguel had asked, and his voice carried a weight that made everyone in the room shift uncomfortably. "What is fair about erasing the place where people belong? What is fair market value for the corner where my daughter learned to ride her bicycle? For the kitchen where my wife taught my granddaughter to make tamales?" After the meeting, Redford had approached Miguel outside. The night air had been cool, traffic passing on the street, Miguel holding a sleeping child who couldn't have been more than 3 years old. "That was your great-granddaughter?" Redford had asked. "Elena. She's too small to understand now, but someday she'll ask why we lost our home." Miguel had looked directly at Redford. "You're rich, you're famous. This isn't your fight." "Maybe it should be," Redford had replied. Miguel had studied his face for a long moment. Easy words. Hard to keep. "I mean it." "Then promise her," Miguel had said, looking down at the sleeping child. "Not me, her. Because I might not be here when they come back, but she will be." So Redford had leaned closer and made a promise to a sleeping 3-year-old girl named Elena Vasquez. He would help if the day ever came when her family needed someone with a voice people would hear. Now, 30 years later, that same Elena was on the phone, no longer 3 but 12, carrying her great-grandfather's faith in the word of a stranger, like a torch passed through generations. "Elena," Redford said into the receiver, his voice steadier than he felt, "if I come tomorrow, it won't be quiet. It will get complicated. There will be cameras, reporters, people asking questions. Are you prepared for that?" "I know it will be hard," she whispered. "But if you don't come, no one will see us. We'll just disappear, and it will be like we never mattered at all." Redford closed his eyes. He thought about his comfortable bed, his quiet mornings, his doctor's warnings about stress, and his heart condition. He thought about the memoir he was supposed to be writing, the peaceful retirement he had earned. He thought about all the reasonable excuses he could give a 12-year-old girl for why he couldn't help save her home. Then he thought about Miguel Vasquez, who had trusted him with something more valuable than money, faith in the idea that promises to children don't have expiration dates. "Eleanor, what's the address?" She gave it to him twice, her voice getting stronger with each repetition. "Go inside now," he told her. Wake your grandmother gently. Tell her to breathe slowly. Tell her that Robert Redford is coming in the morning, and we're going to try to save your house. You're really coming? I'm coming, he said, because I gave my word, and your great-grandfather was right. Some promises don't weaken with time. They get stronger. After he hung up, Redford sat in his study for a long time, looking at the phone and thinking about the weight of yesterday's words. Then he went to pack a small bag and prepare for what might be his last fight. At 5:47 a.m., Robert Redford stood on a street in East Los Angeles, holding a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold during the drive from Northern California. The neighborhood looked smaller than he remembered, houses closer together, many showing the wear of decades and the stress of families stretching every dollar. No cameras yet, no entourage, no assistants, just families standing on sidewalks, holding each other, waiting for the end of the world to arrive at 6 o'clock. Elena stood near a small house with a chain-link fence and a garden full of flowers that someone had tended with love, despite everything. She looked older than 12 in the early morning light, the way children do when circumstances force them to carry adult weight. "You came," she said when she saw him. "I gave my word." Her grandmother emerged from the house, a woman in her 70s moving slowly but with determination. She looked at Redford for a long moment, then nodded once. "Miguel said you would come if we needed you," she said in careful English. "I didn't believe him. Famous people don't keep promises to people like us." "Some do," Redford replied. "Some try to." At 6:03 a.m., the first bulldozer rounded the corner, then another, a convoy of destruction following behind them like a funeral procession. The lead operator was young, maybe 25, wearing a hard hat and the uncomfortable expression of someone who knew he was about to destroy something that mattered to other people. He kept looking at the families gathered on the sidewalks, avoiding direct eye contact. A man in a crisp suit stepped forward, clipboard in hand, the kind of professional competence that could make human displacement sound like progress. "I'm Robert Chen, Site Supervisor for Hartwell Development," he announced to the crowd. "We need everyone to move back behind the barriers. This demolition is proceeding under full legal authority." Redford stepped forward. "Legal authority to do what, exactly?" Chen looked at him, and Redford saw the moment of recognition cross his face. "Mr. Redford, I wasn't expecting to see you here. I wasn't expecting to need to be here." "This project has undergone full review," Chen continued, his professional tone unchanged. "Environmental impact studies, community input sessions, legal clearances at every level. Everything has been done properly." "Properly," Redford repeated. "That's an interesting word. Is it proper to give families 3 days' notice that their homes are being demolished? Is it proper to schedule destruction for dawn when working parents can't be here to witness it?" "The timing is based on optimal operational efficiency. The timing is based on avoiding cameras," Redford interrupted, "on making sure this happens quietly before anyone with a voice people hear can object." Chen gestured towards the lead bulldozer. "Sir, we have a schedule to maintain. Please step back behind the barriers." The bulldozer operator looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Mr. Chen, maybe we should wait. There are a lot of people here, and some of them are elderly." "Your job is to operate equipment, not make policy decisions," Chen snapped. "Proceed with demolition." Elena stepped forward then, walking directly to the bulldozer, despite her grandmother's attempt to hold her back. She looked up at the operator, a girl facing a machine that could erase everything she had ever known. "My great-grandfather built the front steps of that house with his own hands," she said, pointing to her home. "See that tree in the front yard? He planted it the day my grandmother got married. Every scratch on that door, Every mark on those walls tells the story of my family." The operator looked down at her, then at the house, then at Robert Redford. "I don't know if I can do this." "You can, and you will," Chen said firmly. "We have contracts, deadlines, investors expecting returns. This is business, not a social work project." That's when Redford made his decision. He walked calmly to the front of the bulldozer and sat down on the dusty asphalt, crossing his legs like a man settling in for a long conversation. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd of families. Even Elena looked surprised. "Mr. Redford," Chen said, his professional composure cracking slightly, "you need to move. This is private property, and we have legal authority to proceed." "Actually," Redford replied, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had learned not to shout when whispering would work better, "this is Elena's property until you take it from her, and you'll have to take me with it." Chen pulled out his cell phone, presumably to call either police or his supervisors. Redford pulled out his own phone and dialed a number from memory. "Sarah, it's Robert Redford. I'm sitting in front of a bulldozer in Boyle Heights. Families are about to have their neighborhood erased at dawn, and I think the Los Angeles Times should know about it before it happens instead of after." Within 30 minutes, the first news van arrived. Within an hour, there were cameras from every major network, reporters asking questions, helicopters circling overhead. The story was simple and powerful. Academy Award-winning actor and director Robert Redford arrested defending Latino families from gentrification. The optics were terrible for Hartwell Development. Chen's phone rang constantly. Supervisors, lawyers, executives, city officials all wanting to know why a routine demolition had become a media circus. By noon, the city announced a temporary halt to all activity pending a comprehensive review of the project. The families cheered, children ran through the streets, reporters interviewed neighbors about their stories, their histories, their hopes. Redford didn't celebrate. He knew this was just the beginning. The fight that followed lasted 2 years and cost him more than he had anticipated. Hartwell Development hired the best lawyers, the most expensive public relations firms, the most connected lobbyists. They questioned Redford's motives, suggested he was exploiting the situation for publicity, painted him as an out-of-touch celebrity meddling in issues he didn't understand. Friends in the industry told him to stop. His agent worried about his reputation. His doctor warned him repeatedly about the stress, the late nights, the constant meetings and court appearances. Redford hired his own team of lawyers, environmental consultants, community organizers. He used his celebrity to draw attention to the broader issue of displacement and development. He testified at city council meetings, gave interviews to anyone who would listen, appeared at fundraisers for housing advocates. It cost him opportunities, studios that didn't want to work with someone seen as politically troublesome. It cost him peace of mind, stress about legal strategies, worry about whether he was helping or hurting the family's cause. It cost him friendships with people who preferred their activism theoretical rather than practical. But every time he considered backing down, he thought about Elena Vasquez, who had trusted him enough to call at midnight. He thought about Miguel Vasquez, who had believed that some people still kept their word. He thought about promises made to sleeping children and how those promises don't weaken with age. They get heavier, more urgent, more essential. The legal battle was complex, involving federal housing law, local zoning regulations, environmental impact studies, and community rights. Hartwell's lawyers argued economic development, job creation, increased tax revenue. Redford's team argued historical preservation, community stability, the human cost of displacement. In depositions, Hartwell executives described the project in terms of optimization and efficiency. Community members described it in terms of loss and erasure. The gap between those languages, between optimization and loss, between efficiency and erasure, became the heart of the case. Elena, now 13 and then 14, attended many of the hearings. She spoke at community meetings, gave interviews to journalists, became a symbol of young people fighting for their neighborhoods. She was articulate, passionate, and utterly convinced that home meant more than property value. "They say they're improving our neighborhood," she told a reporter from the New York Times, "but you can't improve something by erasing it. You can't make a community better by forcing the community to leave." The case attracted national attention. Other cities facing similar displacement fights reached out for advice. Legal scholars wrote about the precedent being set. Housing advocates watched closely to see whether celebrity involvement could create lasting change or just temporary publicity. In the end, the resolution was partial, the kind of compromise that leaves everyone somewhat dissatisfied, but creates room for everyone to claim some form of victory. Half the block was preserved as affordable housing, with legal protections to prevent future displacement. The other half became a small community park and cultural centre. The luxury condos were built on a different site, still profitable but no longer requiring the erasure of an established neighbourhood. Elena was 14 when the agreement was signed, old enough to understand what had been saved and what had been lost, old enough to recognise that victory in the real world is usually incomplete. "Why did you do it?" she asked Redford after the celebration dinner in the same community centre where her great-grandfather had spoken 30 years earlier. Redford considered the question. At 79, having spent 2 years fighting a battle that had cost him money, reputation, and peace of mind, he wasn't entirely sure of the answer himself. "Your great-grandfather asked me to remember you," he said finally, "but I learned that remembering isn't just keeping someone in your thoughts. Remembering means keeping faith with who they were and what they hoped for. It means making sure their trust wasn't misplaced." Elena nodded, understanding more than her age should have allowed. Today, Elena Vasquez is 24 years old. She studies urban planning at UCLA, specializing in community development and housing policy. She still lives in the same house her great-grandfather built, though now she helps her grandmother with the mortgage and maintains the garden her family has tended for 40 years. Robert Redford is 86. He never wrote the memoir publishers wanted. He rarely gives interviews. He turned down several lucrative projects during the fight and several more afterward, choosing quiet over profit, rest over recognition. But once a year, he drives from his home in Utah to East Los Angeles to visit a small park that bears Miguel Vasquez's name. The plaque by the entrance reads, "In memory of those who believed that home means more than property, and neighbours matter more than profit." Redford sits on a bench in that park sometimes, watching children play where bulldozers once waited to destroy. He thinks about promises, how easily they're made when you're young and how heavily they weigh when you're old. He thinks about the difference between words spoken carelessly and words that become part of who you are. The phone calls don't come as often now. Fewer people have his number. Fewer believe that celebrities keep promises made to ordinary families decades earlier. But the old landline still sits by his chair, in the evenings within reach in case someone remembers his name and needs a voice that people will hear. Because some promises echo across decades, some words once given become part of the fabric of who you are. And sometimes, in a world that moves too fast and forgets too easily, the most important thing you can do is remember a small girl who trusted that adults mean what they say, even 30 years later, even when it costs everything you thought you wanted, even when the only witnesses are your own conscience and the memory of a man who believed that promises to children are promises to the future itself. In the end, that might be the only story worth telling. Not the story of what you achieved or how you were celebrated, but the story of what you remembered when forgetting would have been easier. Not the promises that made you famous, but the promises that made you human. The weight of yesterday's words. Some people carry it their whole lives. The lucky ones find a way to honor it before it's too late.